Good afternoon to everyone. We're so happy to have you join us. We have a wonderful presentation to provide for y'all today. And we'd like to thank our sponsor, Iberia Parish Library, for helping us to get our wonderful speaker today. Our speaker is Lisa Wingate. She is a former journalist, an inspirational speaker, and an incredible New York Times best-selling author. She has written over 30 novels and has film options on her book Before We Were Yours. She has also written the Book of Lost Friends, which is also a New York Times bestseller, and is based on 2,500 ads written after the Civil War when families and friends were trying to reunite. Our historic New Orleans collection has created an online database of these ads, and some of our local letters are being displayed in the Doc Voorhees wing. We thank Lisa for bringing the history of these letters to light, and we are more than thrilled to have her with us today, joining us for our Books Along the Teche Literary Festival. Join me in welcoming Lisa Wingate.
It is so good to be here with you guys today. Particularly good to be talking about this book because the Book of Lost Friends was scheduled to come out April 7th, 2020. And so I had been, the big book tour was planned. I was going to spend a couple months on the road, going to I forget how many cities. It was going to be huge and exciting, and it was following up Before We Were Yours, which had done really well, and everything was great, and I did a little pre-publicity thing in early March 2020, and then in about the third week of March, I was going to go to the warehouse and sign hundreds of books that would go to bookstores everywhere, and then, we all know what happened in the middle of March 2020. This COVID thing hit. All of a sudden, I wasn't going to the warehouse. I wasn't going on the book tour. Everyone was canceling everything. And we started talking about books on Zoom. So a lot of the tour went on ahead, but it was on Zoom. And then there was a lot of talk that we're going to get really good at this Zoom thing and really accustomed to it. And it'll kind of replace live book appearances and live book talks, and we won't get together live anymore and talk about books because Zoom is easy. You only have to get dressed nice on the top half. So there was a lot of talk that that's how it would be, and a lot of people really believed it. And but look, here you are, and here I am. And we're all here together to talk about books and stories and how they bring us together as a community. And you know, if you think about it, books are one of the few places today, one of the few things over which we still do community. You know, libraries, bookstores, book clubs, book events, we still get together and we talk about ideas because it seems harder and harder for us to get together and just talk about stuff. But we still do it over books, and I think that's so important, and it's more important than it ever was as we drop other forms of community. I grew up in a time that was so different. Community was everywhere. Everywhere you went, we knew the people who checked us out in the store. We knew the crossing guard at school. We knew the man who pumped our gas. My first crush was Bill the Texaco man. I could specifically remember from my youngest years getting so excited when we pulled in and we ran over that little black hose and the bell on the side of the building went ding ding. Because I knew that Bill the Texaco man was going to come out. And he would have lollipops in his pockets. And he would know all about our car, and he would ask us about school, and he would say we had grown so much since the last time our tank was filled up. And I figured if I didn't grow up and marry my daddy, I was going to grow up and marry Bill the Texaco man. But that's what life was like. I grew up in this kind of 1970s 3-bedroom ranch house, neighborhood out in the country. Every house had a mom in it. A lot of houses had one car. If it was mom's carpool day, she kept the car and dad rode to work with somebody else. But that was life, and about the time you were done with your Cheerios in the morning, if you had a really cool mom, you got Fruit Loops. I had the Cheerios mom. So when we were done with our Cheerios in the morning, she was ready to have shed of us and get us out of the house. So we would go outside, and that was before there was anything on TV. Unless it was Saturday morning, there was nothing on TV you wanted to watch as a kid. So we just went out and we just played and we made up stuff and we did things, and we would get under the pine trees and rake the pine needles and outline the outlines of our little rooms and our little houses, and we would invent who we were and what we were going to do. And if we got hungry and it was lunchtime, we just went into whatever house we were at, and the mama there fed us. Usually peanut butter and jelly and Kool-Aid, because Kool-Aid was cheap. And if she was a really swanky mom, she might have those Tupperware Kool-Aid mold things. You got a Tupper Kool-Aid sickle at that house, and you had to make sure to put the stick in the proper place, because if you ruined somebody's Kool-Aid molds by losing the stick, that'd be the last Tupperware sickle you ever got at that house. So through this neighborhood, right through the middle of this horseshoe-shaped neighborhood, ran this little dirt-bottomed Oklahoma creek. And it wasn't more than a trickle, and in the dry summer, you could jump across it in some places, but some places were deep. But for us kids, that thing was every river from the Nile to the Amazon to the Congo in darkest Africa, and we were Tarzan and Zorro and Laura Ingalls Wilder, and if we had read it in a book or seen it on TV, we went down in that creek and we played it by the hour. And about once a month, maybe a little more often in the summer, we would get in our heads that we were going to have us an adventure. And we were going to go farther down that creek than any kid in the history of Bridle Trail's neighborhood had ever gone. So you had to have sustenance for a project like that. So we'd pack a backpack with some food and some matches to start a fire to cook a hot dog or whatever, and fishing stuff and things. And we'd start out in the morning, and we'd go and we'd fish, and we'd swim in the swimming holes, and we'd make sandcastles and do whatever we had planned for the day. And it would get later in the day, and you kind of couldn't tell what time of day it was down there, because it was 15, 20 feet dug down in the soil, and the trees all grew like this over the top, and so it was always shady. But it would get to, it would cool off in the evening a little, and the insects sounded different, and you might see a few lightning bugs in the trees, but you kind of could feel evening coming. And we'd start looking around, and we'd start saying to each other, we might be so far down the creek, we might not make it back before dark. Our mamas might have to call the police to come find us. Kidnappers, wild animals, anything could be that far down the creek. And then it would get to be supper time, and y'all who were around before cell phones, you know what happened when it was supper time in the neighborhood. The mama calls went out. So we'd be like down the Congo worried about kidnappers or looking for lost tribes of man or doing whatever we were doing, and we'd hear, Lisa, Laura, Shelly. We'd come up out of that creek, y'all, and we were still in someone's backyard the entire time. But the thing about it was that creek was a separate world. You didn't hear lawnmowers up top. You didn't hear TVs. You didn't hear voices. You were just down there in this world of stories. Whatever story we had in our heads, we were just insulated in this world of stories. And that's where I learned to write a story, to make up a story and live it. And I'm really just kind of a kid who never grew up because that's still what it's like for me. People will ask me after a book is written, what happens to so-and-so, or what did so-and-so do after? Did they get married later or whatever? And I'll think, what are they doing? And then I realize nothing, because they're not real. They don't do anything once the book is over. But to me, I'm sure I need therapy, because to me, they're just these people, and they're living their lives out there, and they're doing their thing, and I, like anybody else would be, and I could catch up with them and find out what they're doing. And so that's really what story writing was like for me. That's how it's always been. The stories just became books as I got grown up. So thank you for coming and being people who like to talk about books, because a room full of people like you has been my dream since Miss Crackhart told me in the first grade that I would be a writer someday. And I just believed her, because first grade teachers don't lie. I did not grow up in a family who thought that was something you would be for a living. I grew up in a family of practical people who were farmers and teachers and computer programmers and things like that. And it wasn't that anybody discouraged me from having an active imagination or from putting it on a page, but it was more just they didn't want me living in their basements when I turned 30. They wanted me to have a plan. So I went to college, I got that practical degree my parents wanted me to get, and I became a writer anyway. And I was fairly lucky in writing. There's this thing you imagine when you're young and you think you want to be a writer. You think it'll be like you see on TV. And on TV, writers drive around in Ferraris, and they live at the beach, and you don't ever see them like slaving away writing. They just go around town and solve crimes and be writers. So I thought, I'll write a book. They'll hand me a Ferrari and a beach house, and that's what I'll do. And I got into this business. I found out it's really not like that for most people. Most people are going to work really hard at it, and they're going to be fortunate if they can just make a living, not have to have a separate day job. So I was really pretty lucky. I wrote my first mainstream novel as kind of a young, just not too long out of college, very young mom would set the baby gently in the crib and go write till the baby insisted on being removed from the crib. So I started selling books. I always had publishers who were willing to publish my books. I never had to go hunt for a publisher. The books were always sold before I finished them. I would sell them on a kind of a synopsis. And it was good. I did about as well as I could have if I had used the practical degree that my parents made me get. And so, nobody could really complain that I should have done something else. But I never had that book that just went crazy in the world. The book that's that dream that my first grade teacher put into me. Until 2017, with this book, Before We Were Yours. This became the book that was that dream. I had changed agents at the time. My new agent said to me, we went through a list of ideas. She said, I like any of them, because ideas are not a problem. People ask me if I think I'll run out of writing ideas. I just run out of time. Ideas are not a problem, although I'm always open to any, so, don't talk in the restroom stall next to me, because I'll be listening. But, so my new agent said, write the whole book, and I'll sell it. And I thought, write the whole book, and you'll sell it. What if it doesn't sell and I don't get paid? Because I had kids in college. By then, those babies, over the course of those years, had grown up, had kids in college to pay for. She said, don't worry, just write it. Pick the one you want to write it. So I did. I wrote Before We Were Yours. My agent put it out there on a Wednesday. By Thursday, 10 of the biggest publishers in New York wanted to see it. By Friday, she was calling me with what for me was a huge preempt offer. And she said the scariest thing into the phone. She said, "But I don't think we should take it. I think if we wait and let it go to auction next week, we'll do better." And so I very bravely said, "Oh, okay. If you think that's a good idea, okay." And so those things always happen on a Friday, so you can panic yourself all weekend. So all weekend I was like awfulizing the choice I had made. Nobody else will want it next week. And then these people are going to be like, well, we don't want it if nobody else wants to buy it. But it went to auction the next week. It sold to Ballantine, which is a subset of Random House. It came out in June, 1st of June, 2017, which is a great time for a book to come out because, summer reading is coming up. All the tourist haunts are ramping up to do events with books and everything. But the thing is, that is also when all the big beach read authors come out with their books. So all your, Grishams and your Pattersons and your Nora Roberts and all those people, they're all coming out with their books too. So our little book landed about number 18 on the lists in sales that first week out. You sort of figure your first week or two is really your only chance of making the bestseller lists because all the people who ordered ahead of time and stuff, like their numbers are going to come in then. So the book came out. It landed number 18. The New York Times list is 15 books long. So you can kind of see what I'm getting at. It's not like horseshoes where you get points if your horseshoe lands close to the stake. Everybody was saying to me, "Lisa, your book is doing great." But they kind of quietly weren't saying, "But it didn't actually make the list." And I was thinking, my book is doing great, but it didn't make the list. But a crazy thing started to happen through the summer. This little book it didn't do that. It was like doing this, and it was kind of doing that. And we thought, maybe as the list softens up later in the summer, maybe it'll crawl its way on there. So 4th of July weekend came. It was kind of a target because none of your big authors are going to put a book out over a holiday weekend. So we thought that'll be a soft week. Maybe we'll make it. We didn't. And, sometimes in life you have to sit yourself down and have a talk with yourself. And that's kind of what I did at that point. I was like, you have got to let this go. This is wonderful. It's so much selling, it's so much better than the other experiences you've had with books. You've got to let it go. You're ruining it for yourself because you want this one thing and it's not happening. 2 weeks later, this little book crawled its way onto the New York Times bestseller list, and then it stayed there for 54 weeks in hardcover and over 50 weeks in paperback, and then now again in little paperback. So in the long run, I'm glad it didn't debut on the list because it didn't make the list because Oprah called or anything like that. It was just folks. It was just people who told people, who put it in someone's hands in an airport bookstore, who told their neighbors who bought it for a gift. It was just old-fashioned word of mouth. And in this crazy, disconnected Facebook, Twitter universe that we live in, to me that said, there's still tremendous power in old-fashioned word of mouth, in just having dialogue with each other about things that matter to us, about things that hit us in the heart, about things that are important, about stories and what they mean. So if you were one of those people who helped this little book out into the world, I thank you for making my dream and my first grade teacher's dream come true. I kind of feel like at this point in my life, I'm uniquely qualified to tell you how to achieve your dreams in 30 novels or less. And we're going to get to the Book of Lost Friends, but be patient with me. For some people, that highway to success is more like a goat trail, which it was for me. The highway to where I wanted to get in the publishing universe was it went all over the place. So Before We Were Yours is really the literary big brother of the Book of Lost Friends. And there's a very solid reason why that happened, why Before We Were Yours ended up inspiring the Book of Lost Friends. If you haven't read Before We Were Yours, it's based on the history of this woman in Memphis, Georgia Tann, who ran this corrupt baby brokering ring for almost 3 decades and got away with it. And the dirty little secret behind it was that while a lot of these, were orphans, a lot of them were simply kids stolen from poor families and from single mothers who were told in the hospitals that their babies died. So there are these now thousands and thousands of separated families whose origins hail back to the deeds of this one woman. And just to kind of put you in that headspace a little bit, well, when I started traveling around with that book, people always want to wonder, why did you write about it? Why did you choose to write about the subject? And they always assume it's because of something in your own life. So for a little while, everybody thought I had to be adopted or I had given a child up for adoption. Neither of those. I have brothers who look so much like me that substitute teachers in school would say, "You have a brother in the 4th grade, don't you? And you better not be anything like him, young lady." So I always knew I was not adopted. I have 2 little man children. I was there when they were born. I know they are mine. I ordered girls. I got boys. But I recognize them from the hospital. So they're mine. Well, they're not little anymore. I have big hairy-legged man children now. But how I related, just to put you in the headspace of what was going on with this and how I related to it, just imagine it's the 1920s through the 50s. You are someone who's down on your luck. Maybe it's the Depression and you've lost your farm. Maybe you're a woman whose husband has died and you have a bunch of kids to raise all on your own. Maybe you're a young woman who's gotten pregnant with a man who will not marry you, and you go to a free medical clinic, a milk and bread clinic, a clinic or a place that says they'll provide housing. The people there are very nice to you. They may ask you some questions. Well, do you have any other children? Well, where are they? When we're ready to help you, where can we find you? They've been very nice. You maybe signed some papers you maybe can't read because you might be illiterate. What you don't know yet is you've just crossed the radar of Georgia Tann and the Tennessee Children's Home Society. And someday soon you will turn around and your children will be gone. And if you even know what happened to them, if you know where they're located, if you can go to court and try to fight for them, you will simply be told they've been given to people who can give them more than you can, and you will not be getting them back. And if you still want kids, you might as well go out and have some more. That is the crazy history of how these families were separated and how these parents lost all control over the whereabouts, the welfare, anything about their children, many of whom they wondered about the rest of their lives. Some of the families were able to reunite, others weren't, others searched a lifetime. Thousands of separated families, which, if you think about it, sounds a little like the Book of Lost Friends. Thousands of separated families, separated at a different time in history. It was the farthest thing from my mind to ever write another book related to adoption, family separation, parents whose kids are taken from them and by powers who are greater than their own, who they have no way to fight. I was at the time in a committed relationship with another manuscript that was not the Book of Lost Friends. And a rough draft of that manuscript was done. Rough draft is always the hard part for me. Rough draft is me figuring out the story from the characters, kind of for myself, and then second draft is cleaning it up so someone else can read it. So the hard part was done. I liked that story. I liked the piece of history it was based on. This manuscript and I were having a nice little romance with each other at the time. And so one day I had gone out to the back porch to work and kind of do the editing and get this ready for my editor and agent. The book was already sold. But on the back porch that day, I was doing what I do. People ask me if I get writer's block. I don't. I get writer's procrastination. I can find 89 creative ways to keep from getting in the chair and actually starting to write. Because writing is hard, at least for me it's hard. I'm not one of those people who like the muse comes and I just pour out words from my blood and fingertips. I have to work at it. It's like taking the ACT test every day. I have to work at it, I have to think, if I do this here, it's like a mathematical equation. If this happens here, then what happens there? And so I have to work at it. And so I was procrastinating, and I opened the email. And some of you are nodding because the email is like a black hole. You can go down there for hours and convince yourself that you're doing something important because these people need to be answered. So I opened the email, but there on the inbox that day was an email from a woman named Diane Plochet from New Orleans. I'd never met her, and she had just read Before We Were Yours, the story of all these children trafficked through this orphanage. And in her note, she said, I think there's something I know of that you might want to write about. And she shared this different story of thousands of children who find themselves adrift in the world with nothing but the knowledge that they might have families out there, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, parents, or maybe not even that if they were separated as babies. And these thousands of parents who know they might have children out there, or brothers, sisters, other family members. But it's been long enough for a lot of these people that they might be able to walk past each other on the street and not even know each other. This story happens, though, in the decades from the 1870s through early 1900s, following the Civil War. Diane had been doing volunteer work with the historic New Orleans Collection Museum, cataloging the records of these families who had been separated all these years ago. And I'm thinking, how can that be? Because how do these stories survive from that long ago? How does this many thousands of stories survive from that long ago? I couldn't tell you my 5 times great-grandmother's name or information, and unless you're really into genealogy, you probably couldn't tell me that story in your family either. The how of it was what Diane was working on for the museum, because she was working with something called the Lost Friends ads, which had run in a Methodist newspaper out of New Orleans in the decades following the Civil War, so during Reconstruction and up through the early 1900s. And it was called the Lost Friends. And it was specifically for people who had been separated during slavery to publish what they knew of the information of the relatives who had been taken from them in the hopes that somebody out there would have information on this person and could relay it back to the person who was searching. And the miracle of these ads that struck me as I was looking at her note was that these things traveled out into the world in the saddlebags of rural mail carriers, on mail wagons hauled by horses and mules, on riverboats, on steam trains, on bayou boats, to the hinterlands of this still fractious, messed up country that's still trying to pull itself back together. And they were read in churches and hung up in post offices and read by subscribers and shared around in communities. And they told the stories of people, ordinary people who were not rich, who were not famous, who were not high profile, many of them, most of them, whose names, as we sit here today in 2023, are probably gone from the earth. They probably don't even survive within the families, their descendants. So how does that happen, that these people all resurface, these gone people resurface? Because they wrote an ad, and it was placed in a newspaper, and it survived in the back cabinet of some library or the archives of some museum or the closet of some old church or house where those things were stacked when those newspapers come out. This little square of somebody's lost story survived. And then somebody comes up with the idea to put these on the internet in a database so that people can search places and names and find these people's stories again in this medium that these people could not possibly have imagined. It's going to fly through the air, and anybody in the world can read it. I mean, they couldn't have imagined that any more than they could have imagined like flying on an airplane or walking on the moon. But yet, here they are. These people are speaking up and telling their stories. And so to the bottom of that email, Diane had attached a few of the ads. And in this blotchy, faded, blotted type of 1870s hand-crank printing presses, I'm reading these people's words, what they put about their family's stories. And it's as if they rise up out of many of them unmarked graves and tell their truth. And it blew my mind. I thought, why have I never heard about this? Why haven't we studied it? I want to know more. I fell down the well of reading these ads. There were over 2,600 of them on the database at that time. And I read ad after ad after ad after ad. And the great thing is, after a while, it's not procrastination, it's research. And in her letter, Diane said to me, there's a story in every one of these ads. And I realized she was so right. Every one of these is a person. It's somebody's story. And I fell into this in the ingenious way that they tried to find each other. You know, it's kind of like an early day social media wall, or those walls where everybody pinned the pictures after 9/11. Have you seen this person? Have you seen this person? Please let me know if you've seen this person. And so I knew I wanted to write about it. And I said to but remember, the committed relationship, the other manuscript, the hard work is done. So I said to Diane, I'd love to write about this. I feel like it's a story that should be told and put out there. But, as you database more of them and you find some that are really unusual, I'd love it if you'd send them my way. So it wasn't too long before she sent me the ad of a woman named Caroline Flowers. And it's in the back of the Book of Lost Friends because it inspired Hanny's story, this girl who is separated from her large family as a young child when they are stolen from the plantation by a nephew of the plantation owner. And as he's fleeing with them, he's just dealing them off willy-nilly to get away with it. And this is how she's separated from her family. And as an old woman, she's writing a Lost Friends ad to see if they're still out there and if she can find them. And she became the inspiration for Hanny. And as I'm working with the Hanny's story, literally writing Hanny's odyssey of what's going on with her, and as I'm tromping the ground, I came down here and I went to Whitney Plantation and up and down the River Road and took a bayou boat tour, which that's interesting, or at least the one I went on was. Just to see what her, I wasn't unfamiliar with Louisiana. The Wingates are Beaumont, Fannette, rice farmer people. So, I wasn't unfamiliar, but still, I wanted to come here on the ground where the story would have taken place. But there's always something I'm trying to work out in my head. And I sort of realized what it was as I got toward the end of writing the manuscript. I was trying to work out, these people come out of enslavement. They've got all these primary needs they suddenly need to take care of. Roof over the head, food in the bellies, whatever else they need, all the primary needs. They've got to try to figure out how to make this happen, and everything is stacked against them. Yet, while this is going on, they take money and time. Many people who couldn't read or write would have had to go to somebody to get them to write the ad for them. And then they would have had to spend 50 cents to put this in a newspaper or buy a subscription to the newspaper, one or the other, because an ad placement cost 50 cents unless you were a subscriber. And with all these primary needs they have, they devote time to this. to trying to find their families. And on the one hand, I'm thinking, well, of course, because we don't want to find our families. On the other hand, I'm trying to think, when you don't have enough food and shelter and you take 50 cents and you spend it on that. And there's always something in life. I don't know if it's just the Lord provides or if it's just your radar's up. But there's always something in life that will explain something to me. So I was getting close to the end. I'm still kind of trying to get into that. Maybe people were just different back then. Maybe they were tougher than we are. Maybe they were, they were more used to hardships and able to bear up against it so they could cough up that 50 cents and go hungry for a while or whatever. These days we think it's it's a hardship if a computer dies on us or our cell phone goes bad or we have a late flight at the airport. So I was getting ready to get on a late flight, and something happened that brought it all home to me. Because I'm standing there with a bunch of other irritated, angry humans who are also trying to get on the late flight that's not there yet on the jetway. And there's a woman leaning against a cement pillar. She's got a cell phone in her hand, and she's talking, and she's kind of scrubbing her head like she just, and I think she's irritated about the flight. She's got medical scrubs on. She's just come from work somewhere. And I hear her speak a man's name into the phone. And she says, "He called me from your convenience store. He said he's living somewhere near there. And if he comes in, I just need you to tell him I got the message." My son. And she said, "I need you to tell him that I'm getting on a plane and I've got to make a connection and it'll be late before I can get there, but please tell him I'm coming." And then she went on to describe this young man to the cashier, age, height, hair color. And she said, "But I don't know what he looks like now. I haven't seen him in 4 years. But he was a big kid, athletic, good looking." And I thought, as the mother of sons, my heart just dropped, and I thought, that's it. That's it right there. This woman's boy is out in the world somewhere because of forces that are too powerful for her to control, and she can't get to him. Would she spend 50 cents on an ad or the equivalent of that today? She probably just spent $1,000 on a last-minute plane ticket, where she has to make a connection in her scrubs, I think with no luggage, because she didn't have a thing with her but a little wallet purse thing. And then I understood it. And that's what was in my head when I wrote the end of Hanny's story, because our people are the primary need. Our people are the most primary need, and they were for those people who wrote the Lost Friends ads too. And every time I read the end of Hanny's story, I think about those people, but I also think about that woman in the airport, and I hope she made it there in time to bring that lost boy home. So, because it's bad decorum to end on such a sober note, because I would love to hear anything you want to know about the book. I'll close up with a story. It's not from the research of the Book of Lost Friends, but it's a Louisiana story, so I think it counts. As I was working on Before We Were Yours, which is a Mississippi River story because it's set in Memphis, one of the things that was hard, you never know what's going to be hard to research, is never what you think. So one of the things that was hard was just propulsion on the river. How are the boats getting around? It's the end of the steam era. It's gas and diesel are coming in 1939. Things are changing a lot. And in particular, I needed them to have like a motorized skiff on the back of a John boat. Most shanty boat people would have just, But I needed them to be able to go upriver in the Mississippi River and some things. And so I need to put a motor on the back of old Zeed's boat. So I asked my 2 man-children, who are avid fishermen, what kind of motor would be on a John boat in 1939? And they looked at me like I was crazy. "Mom, We weren't born in 1939. We weren't. How would we know? So I did the best thing. I Googled, and I found a motor that was called a water witch. And I liked that, water witch. It just sounded like it would dredge up all the gumbo on the bottom of the river and the bones and the secrets. And so I put a water witch on the back of Zeed's boat. It turns out, y'all, that a water witch is the hardest kind of boat motor to research in the world. It was sold in the Sears catalog, so you wouldn't think so, but it is. I can't find out how do you start it. Is it a key? Do you pull a string? How do you steer it? Is it a tiller handle? Is there a steering wheel? I even go to the antique boat motor museum / convenience store / barbecue place outside Hot Springs, Arkansas. And they don't have a water witch there either, in case you're ever by there. They don't have one. So I do what you do when you're a writer and you just love a piece of the story. You don't want to get rid of it, but you can't find the details. You just fudge it. So I say, instead of saying like how they started it, you just say, and the motor roared to life. Problem solved. Editors in New York, they don't know how you start a water witch in 1939 anyway. So this book goes in for editing. It's not a problem. But in the back of my mind, there's this one little old man. He might live around here somewhere, who restores antique boat motors. And this book is going to come out, and he's going to say to me, a water witch could not push a boat up current in the Mississippi River in 1939. You don't do your research, Lisa Wingate. And so it's bugging me. So I go for a book writer's weekend with one of my closest writer pals, Judy Christie, Louisiana writer. And we're at her brother's place on Caddo Lake. And Judy, she's a longtime newspaper caller, writes a column in Shreveport now, longtime newspaper person. So she's come with an agenda. This hour we're going to talk about Amazon, and this hour we're going to talk about, plot lines, and this hour we're going to brainstorm new stuff. And so we've got an agenda. Meanwhile, in the cabin next door, Sam the fisherman is bored. So we're out on the deck. It's spring, it's beautiful. We're out on the deck. Sam's on his deck. Hey, y'all, come on over and visit. We're like, well, Sam, we're working. We'll get over there. We go out on the dock. Sam's out on his dock. Hey, y'all, come on over. I've got iced tea. So it gets to the end of the weekend. Judy says, Lisa, we really need to go see Sam's cabin because he's super proud of it. So we go over there. We walk up the steps into Sam's cabin. I get in there, y'all, and I am like a photographer at a fashion shoot on a Paris runway, but with my iPhone. Because this place is a fisherman shack deluxe. The cabinet handles are bobbers. The lamps are fishing poles. The toilet paper is on a fishing reel. The toilet seat is clear lucite with fishing lures embedded in it. I'm taking all these pictures because I want to show the man children what kind of a shack they can have if they stay in college. So I take all these pictures, I turn around to leave. There by the stairs, the door we came in, the stairs we came up, is a bay window with Sam's desk. And next to Sam's desk is this antique motor on a stand. And I can see its lovely Art Deco case. And I get a little closer and I can see the W. And I look at Sam and say, is that a water witch? And Sam says, yes. That's my 1939 fully restored water witch. So I take 2 lessons from that. One, you just never know when the research is going to fall from the sky and land in your lap. And secondly, whatever else you're doing, never, ever, ever, ever ignore your neighbors. So what else can I tell you about the book? I think we have a little Q&A time. Oh, we have brightly colored microphones, too.
How about the research on the teacher that
How did I come up with the teacher in 1984? What about the research on the teacher? I come from a family of educators, so Benny's life is dinner time conversation for us. My mom was a longtime educator. My husband's a teacher. My in-law parents are teachers. So I've pretty much heard it all. The conversation gets pretty honest at the dinner table. But I also had friends in college. We were talking in the book club earlier. I'm from that 60s, 70s flower child type generation. So I had friends in college who went off to do Teach for America with very, very starry-eyed and idealistic. And I remember hearing back from them what that was like and how hard it was. And not all of them, of course, made it through that process. But some of them made a big difference, and some of them are still working in low-income schools. So I was very aware of that. Also, when my kids, I grew up kind of, like I told you, in this kind of generic kind of neighborhood where everybody was kind of the same. But when my kids were little, we moved to small towns. And the thing about a small town is it's a microcosm of society. You can't have a baseball team where everybody's daddy has, makes $50,000 or $60,000 or $80,000 a year or whatever. You're going to be mixed in with everybody. And so it wasn't very long before we had a lot of bonus kids who didn't have anywhere to go on the weekend because mama didn't want kids around, who needed help with homework. It wasn't very long before we, were helping teachers and bus drivers have a little food around, hence the ding-dongs, whatever could be given to a kid to have a little food to eat. The earliest point I really realized that was not very long before my youngest was in a small school. And he started, it quickly became clear that the cool thing to do at this school was not take cafeteria lunch because the cool kids got to the cool kids table with their sack lunch. So we started doing sack lunches early. So he kept, pretty soon he's like asking me, can I have 2 of this? Can I have 2 of that? And when it got to 2 desserts, I'd be like, no, buddy, one dessert per day. No, you're not every day. But Mom, can I have 2 Twinkies? Can I have 2 fruit snacks? Can I have 2 puddings? Whatever. And I'd say, no, you can't, And so finally one day, as you get in the morning with your kids when you're trying to get them out the door into the car, I said, why do you keep asking me this? I said, no. And he says, well, because Jake's mom only sends a peanut butter and jelly sandwich with him every day. And I don't know why his mama does that. But we can share my chips. And we can share my carrots. And, if you send me a Twinkie or something, we split it in half. But when you send a pudding cup, only one of us has got a spoon. And so, we started sending secondaries for Jake. But it was the first time I really realized my kids are going, I knew who Jake's mom was, small town. Jake's mom worked in one of the stores in town. She's doing the best search she can to get Jake at the cool kids table. But she can't afford all that stuff. So that just began this long odyssey of my husband teaching in schools where we had, like I said, a lot of bonus kids in and out of our house. Saw a lot of them go on and do well, saw some of them get lost into the world. Every kid in Benny's story, the great thing about fiction is you can just put them in a novel and you can fix it. You can't always fix it in real life, but in a book, you take that nasty lady at the grocery store who's being mean to everybody, you put her in a book and you just take care of her. So that's where Benny's life comes from. What else? How long does it take me to write a book? I used to be a lot faster than I am now, honestly, but there was less to do. When a book gets high profile, then there's a lot of email to field and other great things that happen. I used to do 2 a year a lot of times, so in about 6 months I could compile, edit, and it comes and goes because you turn it over to your editor and then you write some on the new book and then it comes back and you have to, do edits and things. But these days, I'm more like one every couple years, just because there's a lot else going on in life. And I have a grandbaby now. You want to talk about distraction. So, I'm a little slower now, but I used to be able to knock out a rough draft in about 3 months, and probably still could if there was nothing else going on. But grandbaby. No, I'm not from Louisiana. No. The closest thing I have to roots is that very, very southeast Texas part of the world. So, similar, but it's not technically part of Louisiana.
Lisa, have you been contacted by people who, through both of your books, have gone on to find their lost relatives?
Yes, especially with Before We Were Yours because it is more recent. I'll do Book of Lost Friends first because that's faster. I have heard from some people who became aware of the database after reading the book and were able to search because they had names or locations and were able to search and find a lost piece of their history, which was my hope when I wrote the book, that people would be able to search and it'd be a shame if that was out there about your family and you didn't know it. So that's that book. Before We Were Yours, I started to hear from people, even on the book tour, who would show up with pull crates or notebooks full of their search for their families and say, I was a Georgia Tan baby, or my mother was, or my grandmother was. Some of them had already found their families, some of them hadn't. They started emailing me. They started asking if I would ever get them together because there was no place for them to meet other people who shared this history of the Tennessee Children's Home Society. So I was a little terrified at first to do it. They kept asking. We eventually did it. Long story short, we got them together in Memphis, and it was just the most amazing thing. I had some speaking things, we planned it because I was already going to be there. They walked in on the first day, and my friend Judy Christie of Water Witch fame participated in all this with me because we wanted to write down their stories while we were getting them together. So Judy came to do that. And the first day, as we were sitting there in a big auditorium at an old folks' home, Judy says, we don't actually know who of these are our reunion people because we forgot to have like a pre-event to meet them before this speech starts. But when the Q&A started, they started raising their hands, saying, I was a Georgia Tan baby, I'm here for the reunion, my mother was. And then it got to be punch and cookies time, which at the retirement home, you don't skip that. So we had to pause for punch and cookies. And when punch and cookies time got over, the coordinator said, well, all of you who are here for the reunion, would you like to come up here and sit down and be a panel? And they did. They came from the far corners of the room, and they came and they sat down, and then, when she asked that, I was like, I was scared to just get these people together with themselves. But it was the most amazing moment because it was their moment to reclaim their stories. This thing had been such a scandal that they were discouraged all their lives from talking about it. They were told they shouldn't dig into it, they shouldn't want to know. You had, some of them had good adoptive parents, some hadn't. You should leave it alone. And it was this moment where they could reclaim their stories. And I feel like that's some part of what it was for the Lost Friends people, too. To put that ad out there was a process of reclaiming your story. To end that story, Judy and I did a nonfiction book that I think might be the first ever nonfiction sequel to a novel about their stories and about their reunion. And I've since heard from many more. Once or twice a month, I'll hear from somebody who's searching, and we've been able to help a number of them find their way to find their relatives, which is amazing. To see someone in their 70s, 80s, 90s, get a picture of their mother for the first time or meet brothers and sisters. Well, there's still a few years left for them to get to know. I never, ever, ever saw that coming, but it's really been amazing.
It's such a recurring theme with war and with so much pestilence that people have separated from because they were forced to.
Right.
Because they were mandated to go into shelters, or were taken away. So it is a repeated theme that's so
It is a repeated theme. You know, we sometimes think that, oh, that's just back in history or something, but, you know, now we have all these children who've been taken out of Ukraine over to Russia, you know, and you wonder how, you know, will their families find them? Will there be a point at which they can search for their families? I mean, it still happens. DNA has helped a lot. With the Tennessee Children's Home Society people, in the 90s, they finally got their, because the state of Tennessee, this was a scandal, they sealed the paperwork, they didn't want anybody talking about it. And it stayed sealed till the 90s. These people fought and fought and fought and fought to get it open. So in the 90s, a lot of them were able to reunite based on their paperwork. But then when DNA came around, you know, DNA has brought a lot more reunions, and the woman who helps the people who come to me and ask, who is herself also an adoptee, that's what she helps them do mostly. Get their paperwork from Tennessee, but also really know how to work the DNA and figure out what it means. And she's amazing. She is amazing. And it's just an incidence of a complete pay-it-forward person, because someone helped her find her birth family years ago. But she spends her time helping these new people know how to make it through the roadblocks and find their information. And, you know, eventually someone will do that, I'm sure, for these lost children in Ukraine and stuff, if they're ever able. I mean, who knows what the future's bringing, but yeah, it is a recurring theme.
Love the book, love the history, the writing, wonderful. Particularly would like to know a little bit more of the backstory of the pooparoos, if you would like to enlighten us on that.
The pooparoo cookies, yeah. So that was one of the things I learned. I learned the ding-dong lesson the hard way as a school volunteer. And it was an older lady in the school who told me, you don't, at church and school, you don't feed them that stuff, because, you know, they'll gorge on that, and then they won't eat stuff they're supposed to eat. And she's like, bring something that's good enough to eat, but it's not, and it's healthy. And so pooparoos were her thing. That's where I learned about pooparoos. And she had been doing it for years, baking the pooparoos and feeding them to the kids if they were hungry enough to eat a pooparoo. So I don't know if she named them pooparoo, but that is what they look like. I mean, they were called pooparoos. I just don't know if she made up the name.
Over here. Over here.
Oh,
Me again. Did you do any research in the WPA slave narratives that might have connected, that the stories might have told some of the discoveries of family members?
I did. I like primary sources. History books are great, but you're always looking through the filter of the historian. And so I like to go back to narratives that were written in the day. So that's what I did. Incidents in the life of a slave girl and things that were actually that era, and then the WPA slave narratives. And I found amazing things in the slave narratives because, it's this little picture of someone's life when they sit down with a WPA interviewer, when they're old, and this government person comes along wanting to interview them. What do they tell in that hour or two when they're sitting there talking? What do they remember? What sticks out from their lives? And some of the stories that are in those are just, amazing, shocking pieces of history you've never heard. Some things are ingenious. A lot of them talk about first families and second families because, they would say, well, I was part of my mother's first family, my mother's second family, blah, 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 because, women were forced to remarry, or they would get separated from a husband or sold off or whatever, and they would be with someone else, and so there would be two separate sets of family. And there were many stories about people who then went to try to gather up their children. There was one story about a woman who, because they tried very hard through oral language news that came over what they called the slave telegraph, which was, one person telling one person telling one person. Some people would travel around as shoe horses and things and, relate news from other plantations. They tried very hard to keep track of where their people were if they had any way to know it. And there was one of the slave narratives was a woman who walked all over the place, gathering up like 12 or 15 of her children, or trying to just set out on foot, which had to be insanely dangerous for her in the time, because it's not made up that the Ku Kluxers and the White Knights were on the roads harassing people, murdering people in the woods and things like that to kind of keep people from being able to move around and change the status quo. But she went walking to gather up her kids, and gathered up quite a few of them. And in the slave narratives, that's one of her kids is relating the story. They're amazing, and if you haven't read them, there are many collections of them now. You can go on the Library of Congress or read them online, but you can also, there's the Louisiana slave narratives and the Texas slave narratives, and you can get them specifically to an area. You can also go there. Some of them were audio recorded, and you can go online and actually listen to the voices of these people as they're interviewed in 1930 by Roosevelt's Federal writers, which is, it'll just, if it doesn't give you chills, I don't know. You're tougher than me.
Is this working? I guess it is. One of my questions is listening to the factual information that you use then to create this fictional story, but you gave these characters a voice. And if you could speak a little bit as to even the littlest characters, how you provided her voice and how you provided her story. I mean, it's as though she really is real and exists. So you actually got inside her head and created this character from a factual background. So if you'll speak to that.
Yeah, it's like I said, I think it's a little bit of a form of mental derangement on my part, because they're very real to me. And so I kind of meet them like you'd meet any person. I can see how the person's dressed, how they talk, maybe can infer what part of the country they're from or whatever. But then it's a process of trying to figure out, what motivates this person, what's gone on in this person's life. Why is this person, we're all products of our experiences. Nobody's reality is reality. We're all looking out at the world through the glass, and all over the glass is everything we've experienced. Where we were raised, how we were raised, how we went to school, what that experience was like, just everything. That's on the glass, and that's what you're looking at the world through. So I'm trying to figure out, what are the shadows on the glass for this person that makes this person see things the way he or she does. And, Hanny's, of course, a lot of it came from the historical research, the shadows on the glass, what it would be like to, what was it like for people in this circumstance. Benny's was a combination of family educators, old friends, and some of the kids some of our bonus kids who had really rough lives growing up out on the lake, where the meth labs are and the stuff goes on. And but that stuff that happens to you in life, we talk a little bit about that in the book club. It's those things that kind of put the cracks and the scratches in your exterior. And that's kind of, how the water comes out and the light comes in, is through those places where you're cracked and broken and you understand somebody because you're wounded, you see someone else's wounds and you have sympathy for that and you have empathy for it. And so, Benny's, I didn't know right at first why she was the way she was, but she just kind of took on her own personality based on, like I said, a couple of our bonus kids who have since grown up and done some really amazing things and have really amazing hearts for what they go out and do in the world. And if you knew where they came from, you'd both be shocked, and then on the other hand think, well, then of course, they understand what it's like to be a kid who can't go home on the weekend because mama has a boyfriend over, and so you've got to, go ask, can you sleep on somebody's couch or whatever. And so yeah, there's a lot of real people in Benny and in her reasons why she is the way she is.
Lisa, I look forward to reading your redemptive stories. My question is who was Georgia Tan that she would separate? families as you described in your
Ooh, wow. Everybody kind of wonders that. And history, we don't know for sure, but she, by all appearances, was a sociopathic personality in a big way. She had grown up upper crust, but she kind of didn't fit the mold for women in the day. Her father was a big judge. She wanted to be a lawyer. She wasn't allowed to because girls didn't do that. And so she went into social work, and early on, she helped a couple kids who ended up in her father's court find a home. And she got a lot of attention for it. She was jealous of her brother. I don't know what all her psychology was, but she went into social work, and from her earliest time, she got run out of Mississippi and Texas for unkosher practices or things that were not considered okay to do, which is kind of shocking when you think about it, and ended up in Memphis. And what happens in Memphis is there's immense political corruption in Tennessee. So Boss Crump has Texas, Memphis, Boss Crump has the state of Tennessee. She comes in, gets in with Boss Crump, and it's like the perfect nest for someone like her. And so from there, it's a for-profit operation. I mean, the letters between her and her lawyer, they're referring the kids as inventory. People who wanted to adopt could be like, I want a blonde, blue-eyed, curly-headed 6-year-old, and I'd like a little girl who is dark-headed like my husband or whatever. And she was, you can see their letters back and forth. Well, do we have that in inventory? And she created a lot of Jewish babies who were not Jewish till they were Jewish on her paperwork, because a lot of Jewish families had a hard time adopting. And so, they learned they could go to Georgia Tan. And so I have met about half the families that I've met are Jewish babies. None of them were Jewish to begin with. It was a good market for kids who might have been part Italian, part Native American, a little more dark-skinned. She could market them as Jewish ancestry and adopt them off to a Jewish family. Hundreds of kids died in her custody and just disappeared. Nobody knows what was done with the bodies. She did have a pretty tight arrangement with the crematorium person. Only 19 of them are buried in the official Tennessee Children's Home Society plot in Memphis. The rest of them just vanished. And but we know lots of kids died, because there were times when volunteer doctors were going in the orphanages and saying, these babies are sick, this disease or that disease is going around, you've got to quit bringing in more kids. And she's just bringing in more and more kids, and they either survive or they don't. And she had people, if a baby was too sickly, she had people whose job it was to wheel that baby out in the sun and just let it expire and dispose of it. And I mean, she enjoyed the power. She enjoyed running around in society, high society with famous people. She was very weird. People would come to pick up a baby sometimes, and she'd have them come to her home, and she'd be upstairs in bed in her nightgown with the baby under the covers, and she would sort of, like she had birthed it for them or something. I mean, she was a strange individual, but, I think all you could say is a sociopath for whatever her reasons were, because she did not care what happened to the kids. It was all about what served her needs. That is the one that has been optioned for a movie. So I hope it does. I would love to see that come to the screen and take life.
I was going to ask that question about the movie, but I was wondering what you're going to do next, because no offense, I see you as, oh my God, she's finding all these kids. Is she going to go to Spain and to research that, or is she going to go to the St. Vincent Hotel and live there for a year to research those adoptees? So what do you think you're going to be doing next?
It is another book about, and the rough draft and the next rough draft are done. It's not that book that I started before, oddly enough, because something else came along. So I don't know if that book is just going to be jilted forever or what. But it is a book about orphans and what happened to them. It's not in a foreign country. turn of the century-ish. I'm not allowed to tell you exactly what it's about. The danger of working with real-life history is that it surfaces before the book comes out. And so the publishers are like, don't you tell. And so mum's the word, but it's another one of those things that it's just like, how could this happen? And we need to know this can happen so we don't let it happen again. All this stuff about don't study history and whatever. I mean, history is, it's kind of like teaching your kids to wash their hands and, put their clothes in the laundry hamper and whatever. It's a life skill to understand history. It's a life skill to understand your family stories. You need those reference points. They may not think they need them, but something's going to come along in their life when they need that story. And I think part of the reason that we have so many young people coming along who can't deal, who have a hard time dealing, other than fractured families and things that go on in the world now, but part of it, I think, is they don't have any stories to rely on. They don't know what the older folks in their family have been through. They don't understand what people can survive and go on, and that a bad day is not a bad life, And that's what stories do for us. It tells us, okay, somebody else had really something bad happened. My grandmother lost a baby, but she went on, and we need to know those things, and we don't sit at the knees of the old people anymore and learn those things. Anything else? I can tell you a story. Do we have time? Okay, so this is about stories and why we need to know the stories of the old folks. So, Tending Roses, my first big mainstream novel, was a little bit the same trajectory as Before We Were Yours. It came out, it didn't get picked for the Oprah Book Club or anything that was big back then. That's been 20 years ago, 2001. So it came out early summer. It was doing the thing, the word of mouth thing. So we got into the fall, and I was supposed to go do a big TV thing in Dallas that was going to be taped and syndicated. And the TV station was, because they had read the book and they liked it, was going to be the first big media hit for this book. So we were going to go to Dallas, meet at a bed and breakfast. Some friends were coming from Dallas and down in Central Texas and different places to meet and pretend to be a book club. They weren't, but they were going to pretend they'd all read the book. So they were going to meet us up there. And so we're up in the morning getting ready, putting on all our plain-colored clothes because no prints on TV. They tend to swim on the screen. So we're all getting dressed. We're so excited we're going to do this thing. And the producer called and said, don't come. A plane has hit the World Trade Center. We're sending all our people up there. You might want to turn on your TV. So we did, and then the second plane hit. And it was just like the world turned completely upside down. And I remember our friends from Central Texas were coming to our house, and that was back before everyone was, constantly in cell phone touch and all. And they pulled up in our driveway, and my friend who I'd raised babies with got out of the car with a red rose for me, and she was smiling, and I thought, oh, she doesn't know. She doesn't know, and I have to be the one who tells her that the world just kind of like came to an end or something. I don't know what's happening, and so that was the end of things for that book, although it has stayed in publication all these many years. But anyway, so, nobody wanted to talk about books for a long time and all that. But that day, I thought about going and getting my kids at school that day. They were in about 4th and 1st grade. And I wanted to go get them because you just wanted to, get your whole family and get in the closet or something safe, But I left them at school. And so I went to get them at the end of the day. And I passed by the little ballet studio in our little town where we lived. And you could see, I saw these parents, and they were there by the door, and they're talking, and you can tell it's very grim, and everybody just looks like, I feel like the world just maybe is coming to an end, what's happening? And then on the sidewalk are these 3 little girls in pink tutus, and they're just twirling down the sidewalk in the tree shadows. And my first thought was, they shouldn't be doing that today, this awful day, and all these people are dead, and the Trade Center fell down, and their parents should stop them from doing that. And then I thought about a story my grandmother told me on an ordinary day when I was only halfway listening and thinking, why do I need to know this? She told me a story about Pearl Harbor Day. And when the news came in, and she said, it felt like the end of the world. This is a day that'll live in, they lived out on a farm. This is a day that'll live in infamy. She said, we were listening to that, and I heard my children out in the yard playing. And she said, the first thing I thought is, oh, they shouldn't be, all these people are dead, and this terrible thing has happened. And she said, I got up, and I stomped across that room, and I threw open the door. And she said, I just stopped. And I stood there in the doorway, and I thought, that's the only thing that's right about this day. And that's what I thought when I saw those little girls. That's the only thing that's right about this day. And because I had that story, it turned around my thinking. Bad things happen. It seems like the end of the world, but it's not necessarily the end of the world. And Grandma went on, and so will you. And that's why we need the stories, because they stick in your mind, even when you don't know when you're ever going to need it. And then it's that reference point that helps you go on. So that's a story about stories. Thank you.